Welcome to the News and Views podcast by the Fintech Times. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFC News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hi, I'm Polly Jean Harrison, features editor at the Fintech Times.
Hi, I'm Francis Bignell and I'm a journalist at the Fintech Times.
Hi, I'm Tyler Smith and I'm a journalist at the Fintech Times.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Francis, Tyler, thank you so much for joining me once again this week. Obviously, Tyler, me and you have had a very busy week being at the Pay 360 conference, but how are you guys doing today?
Well, yes, Polly, we were at Pay 360 this week. Very, very busy. Oh my goodness, it's all just a blur in my memory, to be honest. But it was great to catch up with a lot of the industry and see all of the payment innovation happening around the world in one room. So yeah, it was really, really great, and I'm looking forward to seeing our interviews being published. So yeah, it should be great. How about you, Francis?
Yeah, guys, I'm happy to be back. Obviously, last week I wasn't here. And yeah, no, I'm just excited to be back from my time off. It was an enjoyable time away. But yeah, no, I'm really happy to be back here talking fintech with you guys.
Amazing stuff. And what are we going to be discussing this week? Tyler, what are you going to be talking about?
Well, there's a really new directive from the payment services regulator. And essentially what it's going to do is stamp out authorized push payment fraud. And it's a huge initiative that they've launched just this week. So we're going to be bringing that to the table. What about you, Polly?
Amazing stuff. And I'm going to be looking at how the UK government has funded an innovation lab to advance Fintech regulation research in Scotland. And Francis, how about you?
My article is going to be on something quite timely, I'd say. We've heard of ChatGPT. And I'm going to be discussing how fintechs are going to be able to experiment with the AI in integrated business planning process following Jedox's integration.
Fantastic. Does anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I don't mind going first. I can get the ball rolling if that's all right with you guys.
Awesome. Go for it, Tyler. Kick us off.
Yeah, wicked. Well, yes, as I just mentioned in the intro, the payment services regulator has really sort of gone after the payment service providers, the 14 largest in the UK, and essentially, in a nutshell, the regulator wants these PSPs to demonstrate how effectively they're handling authorized push payment fraud. Now, the 14 PSPs in question here are AIB, Barclays, HSBC, Lloyds, Metro Bank, Monzo Bank, NatWest Group, Nationwide Building Society, Northern Bank Limited, Santander UK, Starling Bank, the Cooperative Bank Group, TSB Bank, and Virgin Money UK. Although this group is very, very varied in their service, they account for about 95% of the UK's transaction volume. So I really do see that the payment service regulator has sort of got a really good scope on who they want to target with this initiative. Speaking of which, basically what they want to do is they've commanded these 14 PSPs to supply figures on how well they handle APP scams. More specifically, they are looking to receive figures on the amount of, well, on a lot of different elements, actually. But first of all, they want to know the amount of people who do not get reimbursed from APP scams, the rates of APP scams happening at sending payment firms, and the rates of APP scams happening at receiving payment firms. And they've put a deadline on this of May 2023. So they've got 2 months to get everything together, after which the regulator will publish the data publicly this coming October. Now, that isn't the end of this initiative. In fact, the data will have to be updated every 6 months. And it's really sort of time to walk the walk for these payment service providers. I think above all, what it was really sort of hoping to achieve is making really public data for consumers to look at and be like, right, who is combating this the best? Who's not combating it the best? Where can I put my money? Whose services should I be engaging with? And I think, we've seen a lot of initiatives from the regulator, well, a lot of regulators really sort of pushing for this sort of transparency in the industry. We've seen it a lot with the consumer duty, of course, by the FCA, follows a sort of similar initiative in delivering a similar goal. And I really think it's a time of reckoning for the industry and the 14 largest that I've just mentioned as well. I think in terms of whether tech comes into this, of course, they're the 14 largest, so they will have the resources and the ability to correlate this data and provide it to the regulator. I think it will be a time. I mean, 2 months isn't a long time, but I think it will be a call for them to be like, oh, we've got to use technology to present all of the data. And what's more, maybe I've forgotten to mention, but it's actually they're taking it on like a banking group basis. So for NatWest Group, for example, it will include all of its subsidiaries and related initiatives. So I think in terms of the regulation, I think this is a really, really good move by the PSR. I think it's no secret that APP scams are on the up. We've seen data indicating massive climbs of 13% in these types of fraud. They are probably the most prevalent or one of the most prevalent types of scams in the payment industry now. And I think the regulators just being like, enough is enough. It's time for you to come clean with how you're handling this. And above all, I think once this data is published, I think it will really encourage market participants to be like, okay, we've got to, pull ourselves together and have the right resources to combat this and to deliver to our customers, because it's really important. And I think, in terms of the accessibility of the data, consumers will have full insight into who to choose. So it could be a real moment of reckoning for the industry. What do you guys make of this? Obviously, I think there's not too many bad things to draw from it. But Polly, why don't we go to you? What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, Tyler. There's not really much negative that you can take out of this. I think anything that helps to combat fraud, which we know is a really big issue, sort of just across the board, at the moment, but has been for a while. Fraud just always seems to be a really prevalent issue, and especially now with these authorized push payment scams. I think I read from the Payment Services Regulator that their figures show that £249.1 million was lost to these scams in the first half of 2022 alone. So obviously that's a huge figure. And so anything that can help sort of combat that is only going to be a good thing. And I think it's great that they've got all the big banks involved to this direction, accounting for obviously the 95% of the UK's transaction volume. I think that's so important. And yeah, just generally, I think this is a really great move by the UK regulator to help get some more transparency into payments, and as well as into the fight against fraud. And hopefully that there will be a difference. But obviously there is always that niggling feeling in the back of your head where you're like, well, I'm sure fraudsters will figure out another thing to do, because they are so quick and so dynamic to react, unfortunately. And fraud has always been a thing, but hopefully this will make a good impact to the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll also be a really good opportunity for the best people in the industry to also highlight, this is what we're doing, this is how well we're achieving, these are the tools we use to combat this kind of fraud. And we see a lot of highlighting of that anyway. But I think in terms of the whole sort of the wider picture of incoming regulation that we're seeing, I'm really relieved to see this sort of heightened level of transparency, especially around payments and scams. I think it's it's deserved by the consumer, and I think that the banks really should now is the time to consider how you deal with fraud and the avenues you choose to take in doing that. Francis, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo what you've just said there, Tyler. Really, it's that it gives organizations and sort of banks an opportunity to really showcase what they're doing to sort of ensure customer security, really, and sort of show that they should be the chosen, provider. Because at the end of the day, I think we always like to highlight it at the Fintech Times, but we are in a customer driven world right now, and in that sort of sense, I think it really, any opportunity that an organization or fintech or bank or anyone really has to sort of show that they are better than their competitors, they should really sort of jump at the opportunity. And I think this is a really good opportunity to do just that. And I mean, as well, I think it helps because transparency is something we're always looking to improve upon. And I think when looking at sort of how many big banks have been fined by regulators, the FCA, or going abroad like perhaps the SEC or something like that, at the end of the day, these regulators are finding that just because you're a big bank doesn't mean you're immune to sort of fraud or to anything like that. And I think this really is a sort of a way to uproot any sort of internal fraud that's been taking place, and sort of a chance to sort of really ensure that no money laundering is happening, and that these organizations are being sort of honest. And I mean, that might be wishful thinking, but at the same time, anything that we can do to sort of help achieve that, I think is good. And I think this is exactly that, is a means to help achieve clear transparency. And like you said, it is just a good opportunity for organizations to showcase their regulated services.
Absolutely. I think in terms of just sort of a closing thought, I do have a single critique of this initiative, and that is that there is, of course, the May deadline for the data to arrive, but then there's a 5 month delay in the data being published, and I'm just wondering how accurate the data will be given the gap in receiving and then publishing it. Will their tools change in that time? Will they be encouraged to invest in fraud fighting tools between that time because it won't come up on the data? Or maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe it will be updated just before it's published. It's hard to tell. But in that case, why wouldn't you just make it an October deadline, or why not just publish in May? I'm not really too sure. But all in all, good initiative. Who else is next? Who would like to go in the hot seat next?
Yeah, so moving on slightly from regulations, I suppose, and looking more towards trendy topics. I mean, ChatGPT has really sort of blown up over the past, I want to say, 6 or so months, maybe even the past year. Really, I mean, time has flown by. I've completely lost track of it. But it's something that we can't ignore anymore. AI has developed to an extent that everything is being answered. I mean, we've seen sort of how deep fakes work, and we've seen how anyone and everyone now has access to AI technology, which is ultimately just crazy. And in line with this, you have to think that with this availability, organizations must take advantage of it and make sure that they're doing everything they can, which is to integrate these services integrate these products, I should say, into their services to better improve it. Because I think it does two things really. It allows customers to recognize a name, and in doing so, it allows the organizations to build customer confidence, because it's something they recognize, it's something they know, and that's ultimately a good thing. So Jedox, a provider of enterprise performance management solutions for financial planning and analysis, has created a ChatGPT integration model which enables fintech, sales, HR, marketing, supply chain, and ESG teams to experiment with generative AI in their integrated business planning processes. So Jedox customers can now use the company's ChatGPT integration to enhance predictive analytics generated by the Jedox AI-assisted planning solution. AI-assisted is fully integrated in the platform to better forecast revenue, demand, cash flow, and customer loyalty. Combining these tools enables teams to identify drivers within the greatest impact on the business. This is in addition to generating a supporting description. So, offering an example of the efficiencies and insights that can be unlocked by the integration, a spokesperson at Jedox said, "Our ChatGPT integration can easily display a monthly management report alongside the chatbot on the front end, so users can adjust their parameters and get insights from ChatGPT side by side. This makes planning simpler because users do not have to spend time gathering data from multiple sources or using third-party AI tools. They can visualize everything in one place and easily share it with other team members." So I really wanted to discuss with you guys, we see, I guess, technology removing the need for human interaction. So here, for example, we're no longer seeing sort of, I guess potentially like accountants coming through saying this is what we've realized, this is how we believe you should go ahead with your finances. Now it's showing that it's bringing everything to the forefront, and making the suggestions for you. Now, sure, you do need someone to sort of authorize those suggestions to think, is this applicable to us? Is it not? You never know. But I thought it was an interesting conversation to have with you guys. And yeah, I just wanted to see really your thoughts on sort of the human touch, if you will. Is it something that needs to stay, or is it something that can be replaced? I mean, is this ChatGPT integration something that we're going to start to see on a bigger scale, or is it quite a niche product? Tyler, I'll go to you first.
Well, I think first of all, it's hard to deny the full power of ChatGPT. I think it's really come up in the industry. Obviously, we saw Microsoft make a $10 billion investment into OpenAI, the developer of the software. I think it's a really handy tool. We have used it ourselves, so we're very familiar with it. But I think from my personal experience, I know that it's not always right, and I don't know how dependent these businesses should be on its results. I think it's a very handy tool to have, and it's almost like a digital assistant in a way. But I wouldn't like to see going, oh, it's fine, it's highly dependent, it can run the show. Like, like when you see people in Teslas who are asleep at the wheel and the Tesla's driving them about. It's a bit of a random example, I know, but I would just like to, I wouldn't underestimate the benefits of human insight. It was something that we quizzed one of our interviewees on at Pay 360 this week, and I said, it's good to use AI in a lot of instances, but also, where is the need for that human intervention? And they completely agreed. They said, "Oh gosh, we've got to have this sort of human insight into AI as well." So I think it's very good. I think it'll come as a benefit for sure, and I think its technology is definitely applicable in this instance. But yeah, let's not become too dependent on it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and I think you're spot on. It really is, as you mentioned. We've all sort of had experiences where it's been wrong, and I feel like if you don't have anyone checking to make sure that what it's producing is right, it's so easy just to become dependent on something like that, just out of sheer laziness, I suppose, because you would just assume it's going to be correct. Because I'd say 8 times out of 10 it is, but on those 2 times, it could be extremely costly, and especially from a financial standpoint, when you're looking at sort of business integrations and sort of seeing how you can really go forward and improve a company. If you're dealing with the wrong numbers, that can be incredibly costly. But then it brings forward the idea that if you don't need, or if you're going to be checking it anyway, why have it in the first place? Is it something that's necessary? Is it not? Polly, what do you think?
I think I agree kind of with what you guys have said already, and that I think ChatGPT is like a really good tool, and if that tool is used properly, it can be, a game changer for a lot of things, not just fintech industry, not just like chat like that, but like just generally speaking in life. It could be a very useful tool for a lot of people, companies, whatever. But I do agree that there does need to be some kind of oversight there. You can't get rid of the human element entirely. I think that's just not it's just not feasible realistically, like you were just saying, Francis. It's right most of the time, but when it's not right, that's when you're going to start having the issues. And I do think it is important to say that obviously AI isn't new. While ChatGPT obviously has kind of grown in popularity very recently and is very trendy at the moment, AI has been around for ages, and there's always been sort of AI bots that you can talk to and ask questions and things like that. I just, at the moment, this one seems to be the one that's pretty good and everyone quite likes. But I think sort of just in terms of like the AI and ChatGPT and using it in both kind of, in the fintech world and beyond, and however you want to use it, I guess, I don't think you can get rid of that human element. There's got to be someone there checking and making sure it's okay. Because I think what else might happen is that you do run the risk of it getting very repetitive. And obviously that's more, I guess, on the content side of things. Obviously, being journalists, I'm sure we've had lots of conversations. I know I've had lots of conversations with various different people in the industry, the journalism industry, about like, oh, ChatGPT is going to take our jobs and blah 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 blah. And actually, I don't think it's going to, because otherwise everything's just going to get very, very repetitive. It can only sort of churn out what's already there and kind of see what's already there and make new from that. So I think having that human element in combined with ChatGPT and using it for the really cool tool that it is and getting the best out of it, I think is going to be an ideal situation. It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. And I did have a conversation. Again, this is more thinking about a journalism side of things rather than the fintech side of things. But I did have a conversation with one of my colleagues from the industry a while ago, who said that she thinks that having human generated content or like a human element or whatever is going to be like a differentiator. Like people will start advertising the fact that they have people generated content or that you're talking to a person rather than a machine. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's a tool. AI has always been around. It'll be interesting to see how we keep going, whether there'll be a new cool shiny AI that we can talk about next week or something like that.
I think that's a really, really cool point. This idea of, it is going to be advertised that it's, this is a human. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm looking to, get like customer support from sort of anyone or anything, I mean, let's use my bank, for example. When I've had issues with my bank, I've always said to them, or I've always sort of looked to get in contact with someone. I hate using a chatbot and I hate using the frequently asked questions. I'm always directly going, how can I get in contact to speak to someone? I want to know that I'm speaking to someone who understands this situation, who can actually sort of tailor a response. And I guess this comes again into that sort of question of, we are in a customer driven world, and me as a customer, I want that. There is definitely going to be that sort of service provided by someone. And I think I'm not alone in that idea that, I prefer speaking to someone in terms of that, something like that. So no, I completely agree. And I think it will be quite cool to see, especially like you say, from our journalistic standpoints, that this was created by human, because then I think, how we get copyrights of stuff. I think it will eventually get to a point where perhaps you're copywriting your own articles to say, like, because anything that we put out on the internet, the AI will adapt and include in it in its churned out responses. So I think it is a really interesting sort of point of view to have that, this was made and created by a human.
Before we move on, I just want to say, in a moment of pure ego, I did ask ChatGPT if it knew who Polly Jean Harrison was, and it did not. So it doesn't know the whole internet, clearly, because there are
Do you
some
know what,
gaps.
though? I think I've looked it up, and it did say, did you mean Francis Bignell, a journalist at the Fintech Times?
Oh, so it knows who you are, but it doesn't know who I am.
Or what can I say, Polly? Or what can I say? I'm joking.
Anyway.
But yeah, why don't we go on to your article last?
As I say, my go now. Right. So from AI to innovation, two, I guess, very similar things. But essentially, Fintech Scotland has secured funding from the UK government to help accelerate innovation within Scotland's fintech space. So all the funding aims to advance research and innovation, particularly in financial regulation. And so this is in partnership with the universities of Strathclyde and Glasgow. The fintech community has plans to create a new collaborative centre of excellence called the Financial Regulation Innovation Lab. And this lab is going to focus on using new technologies to help accelerate different efficiencies, revolutionise risk management, and shape future regulatory developments. So essentially, this is a very exciting time to be a fintech in Scotland, I think. And it will be really interesting to see how this all ties in with the roadmap that was launched in March 2022, and as well as the recently announced UK Innovation Initiative, the CFIT, formed in response to the HM Treasury FinTech Sector Review. So essentially, this lab is going to work kind of across the industry and develop a few different sort of major actions, such as, a sandbox to help test and advance fintech innovation, different facilities to help new businesses accelerate their path to commercial success, different academic research, helping to advance the deployment of tech in finance, etc., etc., etc. So essentially, just lots of very exciting things are happening in Scotland. And the reason that I want to talk about this today is, once again, I'm just quite interested in talking about fintech in different hubs that aren't necessarily the major ones that you think about. Obviously, we know that London is a huge fintech hub and there's so many like major fintech places all across the globe. But there are other places that have fintech centers and a lot of different fintechs that are there ready to nurture, being super innovative, and obviously Scotland is one of those places. And it's really nice to see, the recognition and commitment of the UK government to the potential of fintech within Scotland. And I think it's really important to sort of highlight these different smaller areas that are no less important than some of the larger areas, because hopefully this is going to be a pretty groundbreaking initiative, I guess, and it'll bring together people in the industry, universities, regulators, and so many different sort of fintech people to help revolutionize the future of financial regulation. So, I mean, I feel that feels like a lot of buzzwords, and it sounds quite sort of dramatic, but it could be a pretty exciting thing. So I'd love to get your guys' opinion on this. What do you think, I guess, especially about these kind of like smaller hubs? I know we talk a lot about kind of leveling up UK fintech, and we talk a lot about the different places within the UK, especially that have nice little pockets of fintech, like Scotland, like Wales, Manchester, all across the UK. What do you think? Do we need to be nurturing these places more, or are they doing all right on their own and moving on swimmingly? Francis, I'll ask you first.
I don't think there's ever really a cap on growth. I don't think you can ever sort of say somewhere has grown enough and that therefore you should focus elsewhere. I mean, you can look at that from two perspectives. You can look at it from, a massive hub spot like London, or you could look at it from, a smaller one like the ones in Scotland, like you mentioned. And I think ultimately it works in both ways. The startups that are created down south, if they are created in London or wherever they're created, I don't ever see there being a world where it isn't good. The only issue that I could potentially see is like maybe oversaturation of, a specific subsector in the market. But even then, I think it's difficult to say if it's oversaturation or just good competition. I think that is where, perhaps going to a smaller hub to sort of get I guess it's maybe a less competitive environment, which could bode well or it could be a negative, and I think there is a sort of a fine line, and it probably differs from organization to organization on what they're looking to achieve, what their aspirations are. But I think, for on the whole, as sort of a sweeping statement, if you will, I think it is really good to see, growth in these smaller hub spots, because whichever way you look at it, everywhere was. I mean, this is quite sort of cliche, but everywhere was once a small hub spot, right? And it did grow to be whatever it was. Rome wasn't built in a day. So yeah, no, I think it's a really good thing to see, and I hope we continue to see it in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's no such thing as too much growth. But I really like your point about sort of oversaturation versus competition. I think that's a really interesting line to balance. And I wonder if anywhere's got there yet in terms of fintech and fintech competition. So that's a really interesting thing that I kind of want to look more into. But Tyler, what do you think?
Well, I think this is a really, really interesting story to bring to the table, Polly. I completely agree with the conversation so far in that, I don't really see any ceiling to growth. In terms of Scotland specifically, we saw in 2022, Scottish fintechs received £305 million worth of funding. And that was an increase of 200% from the funding they received in 2021. This really reminded me of a similar innovation lab that Fintech Scotland launched with TSB in June of last year. And that was based in Edinburgh, first of all, but that was specifically to help sort of SMEs grow their businesses and develop products and to help consumers deal with the challenges of cost of living crisis. So I think that fintech, and especially Scotland more specifically, is really being recognized as a powerhouse of innovation within this industry. I think that it's done well to position itself within the fintech scene, and newer initiatives like these, like the one we're talking about here, is just sort of going forward and confirming that. So I think that innovators and the world believes that Scotland, it really is a promising scene for growth and development. I think that's really confirmed by the amount of funding that's flowing into Scotland and the sort of the wider northern region, if you will. So yeah, in terms of the UK more specifically, I think it's initiatives like these that are helping to make the power of fintech more widespread. So yeah, way to go, Scotland.
Amazing stuff, yeah, Tyler. I think I agree with everything you said. So it's one of those things where, kind of similar to some of the other stories, you can't really have a negative with this sort of thing. And it'll be exciting to see what Scotland does with all this funding. So, looking forward to that future. But thank you so much, guys, for bringing those articles to the table today. If you would like to hear any more about anything we've talked about today or anything else about the fintech world, head on over to fintechtimes.com, where you can find plenty more news and insights all about the wonderful world of fintech. But very quickly, let's move on to what I learned this week. So each week, being on the editorial team, we get so much news and insights and new information crossing our desks that we thought it would be fun to share that with our listeners. So Tyler, what have you learned this week?
Well, this week I was covering a report by Quad Orbis, and it was really, really damning on the state of compliance in UK businesses, in the fact that only 1 in 10 businesses surveyed have an actual sort of readiness to comply with regulation, and over half had like a really fragmented system of compliance and regulatory standards. So it was quite concerning, given now that we're talking about the PSR. I think I don't know. I think there's more work that needs to be done in that area. What about you?
So what I learned this week actually came from when we were at P360 and I got to speak to Lord Chris Holmes. We had a really interesting conversation about sort of like diversity, accessibility and inclusion within the financial world. But there's one thing that really sticks out at me that I just really wanted to share. And essentially, I asked him, why should businesses diversify? Why should we care about diversity inclusion? And essentially he replied, diversity or die, which I think is just a fantastic phrase and one that is very, very true. And yeah, obviously if you want to hear more about that, wait till that interview comes out on the website shortly. But diversity or die, I thought, yeah, that's a good one. But Francis, what did you learn this week?
Feels like everything has been sort of ChatGPT orientated this week. But what I learned this week was that Klarna, the massive BNPL service, has collaborated with OpenAI to bring a personalized and intuitive shopping experience to ChatGPT. Consumers can install a Klarna plugin from ChatGPT's plugin store, and once installed, they can ask the service for shopping ideas to get a curated selection of items relevant to their request. And, having spoken about already this, in what's the word I'm looking for here? Like integration, I thought this was really, really cool.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Francis and Tyler, for joining me this week. It has been a pleasure, as always, to talk about fintech with you, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the News and Views podcast by the Fintech Times. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversations using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.